Hello, everyone. My name is Kayla, and this is Dark Tales from the Road. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me today. I am exhausted. I'm excited for today. This is definitely a story that's a little different than what I have been doing. So I am excited to change it up, and I hope it is as interesting to you guys as it was to me. But yes, I'm so tired. It's been a long weekend, and I thrive on being alone. That's why, like, during the week while my kids are at school, it's very recharging for me. And so, like, my husband's been home. He took Thursday, Friday off, and then we had like family dinner at our house. We live in Montana, away from our family and friends. We are native Coloradoans, and so it was a difficult move up here. So my husband has a smaller staff, and so we always get together for family dinner because when you're on a remote job with a small amount of people who left everything behind, we make sure that we are a family. But just, every little thing stresses me out. Having people over, my house clean, and food for them and everything. So, you know, um, and then my kids had a birthday party, which I don't know anyone up here yet. I'm definitely trying to make some more friends. So it was probably good, but I had like a severe panic attack. Like all weekend, I was super anxious. I was just really struggling. Like I struggle to get out of the house some days. Like I am anxious to leave. Like I don't want to go. Very weird. So, some ups and downs. That mental health is kicking my ass right now, but we'll get through it. It's a new week. I did not want to record today, but got to get it done. This is my quote unquote job that I chose for myself. So let's get into it. I don't think I have any other updates. Nope. So we are on episode 25, guys. I'm pumped. Halfway to 50. 50 is a big goal for me to get through right now. So, yeah, I'm so excited. Today we're going to be going to the state of Vermont. I know absolutely nothing about Vermont. Those northeast states are just not on my radar. I grew up in Colorado, and so it's like that whole west side of the United States I know a lot more of. So it's been really awesome to be able to research these new places for me. And I love research. And so it's been cool just to see the history of places. And that northeast side is huge because it, created the United States. So it's been really, really cool. So yes, we are going to be going to Brunswick, Vermont, and we are going to be exploring the Brunswick Springs. So there's not much left of the Brunswick Springs. It has a really cool history from, them trying to build a resort, healing waters, and a lot having to do with the local native tribes. So it's spooky, but kind of in a different way. So that's why this one is different. I hope it hits you guys just right, like it did with me. So let's go ahead and get started. If you're new here, welcome. I'm so happy to have you. A friend of mine, actually, all the guys, we were talking about my podcast. It came up, and he said that when he was looking through podcasts, mine actually came up as a suggestion. And I am like, just that one little thing just overwhelmed me. I was so excited for that to happen. Like, it was so cool. So, I don't know where I was going with that, but let's get started today. Yes, if you're new here, I always start with a little bit of history. I start with the history of Vermont, and then I'll do a history of Brunswick, and they're very short, condensed, just some major points that were a part of that. And then I go into the subject, and I usually start with the history of that subject and then go into what's all involved there. So that's kind of how it works. If you would like to skip over the history of Vermont or Brunswick, feel free to. I think most of the time it's 15 to 30 minutes, depending on how much I do. So let's get started. So, Vermont. I got a lot of information on vermontvacation.com, history.com, and Wikipedia and Britannica. History.com and Britannica always have some really good points, so I like to use them a lot. So, Vermont, its story started in 1791 when it joined the 13 colonies and became the 14th state. It comes from the word, these French words get me, I don't know why I can't say them, Les Monts Verts, sure, which means green mountains. And the first settler, his name was Samuel Robinson, and he started his land in Bennington, and he started to clear that land for him and his family in 1761. So there was a huge gap of about 28 years from 1763 to 1791, where the non-Indian population of Vermont rose from 300 people to 85,000 people. That is crazy because they have a huge Native American population there, that it's really insane how it rose such a huge amount over the Native American population. So there were battles at Bennington and Saratoga, which they are hugely recognized as the massive turning point in the American Revolution War. They were the first major defeat of the British Army. And in turn, it convinced France that the American rebels were really worthy and in need of massive military aid. So then the French really came in for the Americans. Sorry, my voice is a little scratchy this morning. I'm not sure what's happening. After the end of the American Civil War, which lasted from 1864 to 1885, there were 2 decades that were huge in economic expansion for Vermont, and then which also brought dramatic social change to the area. Vermont was actually the first state whose constitution banned slavery, and a ton of homes in that area were actually different stops for the Underground Railroad as a path for the slaves to get to the north, which is pretty cool. I have never been to Vermont, so I'm like, if they have some that you can look at, that I've never experienced that in my life. I lived in Charleston, but it's very different, and so I would love to see kind of anything about the Underground Railroad, So in 1860, they were a huge producer of hops in the nation, a leading producer, like huge, with about 640,000 pounds, which is about 290 kilograms, which was second to New York. And this crop was a replacement for the disappearance of the sheep trade at that time. They were huge in sheep trade, and it was starting to massively decline. And so the crop of hops really came in and saved them. But eventually, through time, hops disappeared too. And a lot of it had to do with plant disease, which really started in 1909. And then there was a huge migration of planting to California. That was kind of in 1853 to 1910, and the hops did so much better in California and produced so much more, because of the climate. And, California is a huge agricultural state. And then at the same time, prohibition came into place. So they had a rough period there. It was the first state to pass marriage equality laws for same-sex couples, and it is a top producer of maple syrup in the country. And it actually is huge in dairy farms also. So they had a very sad period in like the 1920s, 1930s, where the Ku Klux Klan was getting very large. Their membership was out of this world in the state of Vermont. The Washington Post says it estimated as many as 80,000 Vermonters who were members in like 1925. Historians actually have the figure a lot lower, saying, 2,000 to 10,000, which is still a lot. And the Ku Klux Klan's main hatred were the French Canadian Catholic immigrants. They actually instituted a eugenics project, which also targeted the Native Americans, the Indian French Canadians, and Afro Americans in that state, and they were forced to be sterilized. And this was around 1930 and 1936, which just, ugh, like, come on. Like, just the thought of eugenics, just, I hate it so much. So, like, um, in 1923, the state passed a law limiting the regular work week of women and children to 58 hours. And yes, I said children. So child labor was still very alive back then, and 58 hours, like, it's insane. A lot of the state forests in Vermont have the highest concentration of sugar maple trees in the US. And I read multiple places that, like, if you love the fall foliage and the changing of the trees, like, that is the place to go. Granted, it's so beautiful in Montana right now with like the yellow and red trees, but I digress. And it's beautiful in Colorado too, driving through the mountains. But, anyways, so about 630 people live in Vermont, and they're like, hiking is a huge part of it. There's 50 state parks in Vermont, 19 ski areas, and a bunch of historic sites and covered bridges, is what they said. And Vermont is considered a survivor of the earlier simple times in the US. So I guess millions of people visit the state each year, and many out-of-state residents actually have their second homes in Vermont, and they go for the beauty and the Vermont mountains and the valleys and just the past that is a part of the state. Some quick facts here about Vermont from history.com. One of the first ski lifts in the US was developed in Woodstock, Vermont in 1934. It was designed by a man named Wallace Bertram, and it was actually powered by an antique Model T Ford engine, and it pulled people up the hill while holding onto a moving rope. So kind of like how the Bunny Hills kind of have now. My son went skiing for the first time in Winter Park in Colorado, and they had they called it a magic carpet because it was like a escalator or something. But I remember, doing the whole rope thing. So it's kind of funny that back then, like, everyone did the rope thing. The first monthly social security benefit check was issued to a resident named Ida Mae Fuller, who was in Ludlow, Vermont, and this was in 1940. She retired from her job as a secretary, and she received her first check in the amount of $22.54, which is actually $2.21 than the total taxes withdrawn from her salary during the 3 years that she worked under the Social Security program. Like, come on. And then, love this little tidbit. On May 5th, 1978, men named Ben Cohen and Jerry Greenfield opened their first Ben and Jerry's homemade ice cream shop in a refurbished gas station in Burlington, Vermont. And then as of 2000, the brand was acquired by Unilever and is about for about 326 million in cash. Crazy, but I love Ben and Jerry's. Fish food's my favorite. And we had one I grew up in Fort Collins. We had one in downtown Fort Collins that we just lived at. So it's always been a huge favorite of mine. Let's move on to Brunswick. So I got some information from Wikipedia and Vermont Living. Brunswick is a town in Essex County, Vermont. The town was named after Prince Karl Wilhelm Ferdinand of Brunswick-Lunenburg. So I wanted to put some information about him in there because I have no clue who this person is. So his father, Charles I, had been an enthusiastic supporter of the war, but nearly bankrupted the state paying for it. As a result, in 1773, Charles William Ferdinand was given a major role in reforming the economy, restoring the state's finances, and improving the economy, and this made him hugely popular in Great Britain. So when the American Revolution War broke out in 1775, Charles William Ferdinand saw an opportunity to replenish the state's treasury by renting its well-trained army to Great Britain. And then in 1776, Charles I signed a treaty supporting Britain in the war, the first prince to do so. So under the terms of the treaty, Brunswick-Wolfenbüttel supplied 4,000 troops of service for the British armies in America. Brunswick was named after the Brunswick-Lunenburg family because of how they contributed to the American Revolutionary War by providing troops. Boom, that's it. I should have just said that the whole time. Anyways, let's move on. So in 2020, Brunswick's population was 88 people. So the 2020 census, the one we all just did. Brunswick is home to 6 mineral springs, and the town is very popular resort destination in like the 19th century. And the land that the springs are on are now owned by the Abenaki people, which are the Native Americans native to that area. And I just wrote that down. They're indigenous people of the northeastern woodlands of Canada and the United States. They speak Algonquin and are part of the Wabanakai Confederacy. I got it. So the Missisquoi Abenaki tribe owns forest land in the town of Brunswick, and it is centered around the Brunswick Springs. And these springs are actually believed to be very, very sacred to this tribe. So let's go ahead and get into the springs themselves. So a lot of the information I got was from this website called obscurevermont.com. A lot of really great information, and it was published in 2018 by a man named Chad Abramovich. Also, I used vermonter.com, and the article I'm going to reference is written by William Alexander. Then I also did mysteriousuniverse.org, super cool website, and the article I'll use was written by Brett Swancer. So, mysteries of the Brunswick Springs. So, this was a great quote. It said, quote, "Fragments of being a unique natural wonder saturated in mystery, history, and allegedly one of the site of some sort of spiteful, destructive curse. It is very much believed that the springs are very, very cursed." They refer to this northeastern part of their state as the Northeastern Kingdom. And that was inspired by a speech by a United States Senator named George Aiken, who in a speech in 1949 said, quote, "Man, this is such beautiful country up here. It should be called the Northeast Kingdom." But there was an edition of Life where Aiken actually used the term very facetiously, and he referred to the state's most poor corner with crazy heating prices and manging looking forests as the Northeast Kingdom. So it was taken good and then taken very bad. And so this area was recognized by National Geographic as a huge destination. But we'll see why it's really kind of not. It is definitely the most fabled and mythical part of Vermont. It has a lot to do with it being very wild. It's very hard to get to. And everyone says that it has a huge feeling about it that's just completely different than the rest of the state. So Brunswick, again, 88 people, extremely small, actually has a vacant one-room school, has a town office building, and 2 houses before you're back in the woodlands. Like, that's it in Brunswick. And some of the very early stories that were coming out of this area, like centuries ago when the first settlers were coming, they would talk about a strange creature that would terrorize this area. And that was in the 1800s. And they talked about it being some bear with like abnormal intelligent but very human-like behavior. And the Native Americans knew of this bear too. Like, they called it a smart bear and also called it a wedjuk, which translated to wet skin. Interesting. So Samuel de Champlain actually witnessed seeing either it or something related to it, because they say it was throwing pine cones at his crew. And this was near the Missisquoi Bay. And he was a part of some explorers that took, 20, 30 trips across the Atlantic. And his people, founded Quebec and New France. That was like in the 1600s, and he was a very important figure in history, especially Canadian history. He created the first accurate coastal map, and founded various colonies in that area. So the white settlers really took what the Native Americans were saying and started to call it Old Slippery Skin, due to its ability to avoid being captured. Like, it would slip out of any trap that they tried to set for it. There were a lot of other characteristics about it because they said it would walk upright like a man and had a very, very mean and angry disposition. And they believed that it would seek out revenge on those people that he had a grudge against. So very interesting. The settlers said that it could rip out fences. It was frightening their livestock and completely flattening. They flattened their cornfields and their trees. And like about the pine cones, they say it would throw stones at like their machinery and their sap buckets. But some thought that the creature had a way of backtracking in its own prints to, in essence, confuse people that were tracking them, because all of a sudden a trail would then abruptly end. And there were actually hunting parties that were put together around the region that all failed to find him, and if they did see him, they would try to shoot him, but nothing came of it. And I say him, I mean they. It could be a female also. Or maybe they're non-binary. Who knows? So it was a huge part of the kingdom's culture. The bear actually was put into local historic records, and it was also put in a book which was called History of Leamington, written by Marion M. Daly. And this was mentioned a lot in local newspapers in the 19th century. And then it was later rediscovered by a local author. And he also wrote folklore. His name was Joseph Citro in his book Green Mountain Ghost Ghouls and Unsolved Mysteries. And he gives a mention in it about the Northland and the Northeast Kingdom. And actually, in 1815, a Vermont governor attempted to hunt it down. Um, Him and his hunting party entered the Maidstone Woods, where they heard it was last sighted, but it didn't go well. They were chased out of the woods by this monster, and the governor claims that he had finally encountered it, but they were so scared they just ran. But people ring true to this every time. It was a bear walking like a man, seemed to be very intelligent but very angry and hostile. And they believe it was possibly provoked because of the people moving in and intruding on his land. And then he became extremely vindictive and hostile about it. And then after a while, the bear really just disappeared, not really seen again after that period. And they say it's largely forgotten about, but obviously we're still talking about it. So it's hard to say there was no information about people still seeing it these days or anything like that. So that was, part of Brunswick and the area of the springs. So we're really going to talk about the springs now. So Ripley's, believe it or not, actually addressed the springs as the quote eighth wonder of the world, which definitely adds this huge mystery to it because people forget about it. A lot of modern day, they don't remember about the springs or the mysteries behind it, but it has always been this massive curiosity because of a lot of the geographical anomalies. So that includes there's 6 different springs, and they're completely different in their mineral content, and they bubble from a single knoll, and they're as close as together, like the spigots of a pop soda pop fountain. So like going to get pop, they're all very, very close like that. And they actually flow under a steep hill before they merge together. So a lot of this is coming from Chad Abramovich and his Obscure Vermont. This was him traveling to the area to explore Brunswick Springs. So I will quote him, but a lot of it is information I got from him. I may have some different quotes from him also. So when they all merged together, when he was there for his visit, it was very orange. He said gunky and iron oxidized, and all that spillway was draining all together down to the Connecticut River, which was below that. And I'll find this picture, but he found a photograph of the springs listed in their individual mineral content from left to right. So a lot of the content were iron, calcium, magnesium, white sulfur, bromide, and there was actually traces of arsenic in them, which is very crazy. So because a lot of the deterioration of the 19th century, the town really tried to exploit the springs and bring more people in. So when they were trying to make that area more modern and actually try to build things there, they were channeling those waters into pipes and built like this huge concrete landing for easy access. But when he visited this area. There were 4 of the 6 springs were actually still in very rusted pipes, and a lot of the infrastructure around them were deteriorating, and that was actually a big deal because now it started flowing in a more natural environment. The water is breaking down the stone to flow how it wants to. So it was also known, the water was known as medicine water. To the Native Americans, the springs were, and they still are, considered magical healing waters on sacred ground. So the Abenaki used to make long distance treks to come to the medicine waters of the Great Spirit, is what they called it. But they only visited during daylight. They refused to go at night. It is, to them, it's a spiritual place, but it also had a dark side. So after dark, you do not want to be up in there around that North Country, around the springs. The Abenaki people believe that there were supernatural balances there. A lot of the light and dark competing against each other, those forms and forces, and they would say that it resided on the Connecticut riverbanks, both areas that they respect but definitely avoid. So even before the white settlers came into that region, it was very sacred and very mystique and mysterious. And the indigenous people thought that the woodlands were full of spirits roaming around, that the springs held this very magical power of healing. So that's why they called it the medicine waters of the Great Spirit, that the Great Spirit had given them this. So, like I said, they would make these huge treks to the springs, and they would use it to heal their wounds, cure diseases and other elements, but again, only daylight hours. Also in that area is Silver Lake, which is also very sacred to them, and it is said that it is, quote, the bottomless. It's quote said to be. It's said to be, quote, to the bottomless and the realm of sinister spirits. So again, before the settlers, it was a very mystical place, and it still is very hidden from the outside world. And the Abenaki closely guarded this, both out of respect and cherishing what the Great Spirit had brought them and all this, but the place was very much feared. Also, they had this very large fear about it because of the spirits and the light and dark and coming out at night. And so with that fear, there is a lore from the Native Americans that say, because it is bottomless and it's supposed to be this realm of spirits, you can actually see Indian spirits around the shoreline. Very creepy. Another lore around it talks about the Rogers Rangers party. They were fleeing from raids and massacres that were happening in the St. Francis Indian village in Quebec. And they had allegedly stashed some of their treasure near this area. And they never thought they would come back to return it or to grab it because they lost their way in that area and ended up dying in the wilderness, completely freezing. And so, there's that story about them, the hidden treasure, everything like that. And it's also said, very, very sadly, trigger warning, that a lot of people would come to the forest near the springs as a place to commit suicide. And that has been in the more recent years. And they actually trigger warning, and I don't want to say this, but they had actually found an infant child that was found strangled to death in the forest. Very like, what the, oh my gosh. So yeah, the more and more I read, I was like, this place is so cursed and haunted and creepy. Let's go. But I guess it's a pretty good hike to get there, and so I'm like, I think I'm out on that one. By so more documented cases discovered by the authorities there and the Abenaki tribe. They say that an Abenaki descendant from Swanton, he found the body of an old logger who had just got sick of living. He tied a rope around a tree limb and his neck and sat down. So a lot of these stories and the spirits and the curses that are found, it sounds very spooky, but people are very, very drawn to this area still. Um, Even like the guy writing the article, he was so drawn to it, he just had to go. Um, so, again, very much known for its natural healing powers, but the first kind of story about the healing powers started in 1748. Allegedly, the Abenaki tribe led an injured British soldier to the springs, um, and he was extremely wounded, almost completely dead. And he was so worried that he was going to have to get amputated, or, infection would come. And also during that time, when you had to have a body part amputated, the surgeon, no anesthesia. Maybe something, but nothing like what we have today. And literally, the surgeon would just saw off the appendage without anesthesia. So, of course, this guy's freaking out. I would be freaking out too. Um, But they say that this is undocumented. It's, this ritual that a shaman does to work with the magic springs for this British soldier. And he started putting it all over his arm, and miraculously, the injured limb was completely healed. And it's supposed to be like the best documented case of the water's healing properties. Again, it's all alleged, not very well documented, all of that. So the Abenaki tribe actually claim that these waters will treat anything, and that they're, quote, all the prescriptions you'll ever need, depending on how you mix them. There, again, is not a lot of evidence that claims how valid this place really is. A geologist from New Jersey once came in and tested the spring water, and he observed that the mineral contents were not all that different from one another. Just a lot of sulfur dioxide, like, hot springs everywhere. But another geologist for the state of Vermont, Dr. H.A. Cuttings, he had a very differing opinion. He described them like the Chalybeate waters in Germany, which I didn't look up, and I should have. I apologize. But it was very similar because it was sought after by the soldiers to heal them and their diseases and their limbs and all that. So even today, a lot of people from local towns will still make that trip to the springs, and they do it because they claim that it's responsible for their longevity through all these years. Again, there's no scientific confirmation about any of it. It's just pretty much legends, lore, and mythology. But not everything has to be about the evidence. Yes, I'm contradicting myself. Yes, it does, but this is kind of just a thing that so many locals believe in, a lot of the Native Americans, and it's just become this destination that people want to experience for themselves. So, in on Vermonter.com, there is a Brunswick resident named Bill Bodle, who told the author Bill Alexander that he had been drinking the waters there since 1945. He actually injured his back working on the railroad, and no doctors or chiropractors were able to give him any relief until he went up there and started consuming the water. And he says, quote, "I'm telling you, that stuff will heal. A lot of people use it." Another example is a woman named Beverly Kettle, who's across the river in this town of North Stratford, New Hampshire. And she has this memory of an old man living in a cabin near the springs when she was just a child, and that he would regularly drink the waters, and he actually lived to the age of 90. And it's this lore that his secrets was all those trips to the springs. And of course, they say that the springs are cursed. And a huge part of that started with a story about a soldier that came back to Brunswick after the French and Indian War. And he went to the springs, and he was so taken aback by his spirit experience there, he actually wanted to bottle the water and create this huge enterprise around it. But the Abenaki tribe were pissed. Not okay. Very firmly objecting to the idea of selling this water. This water that the Great Spirit provides for them. But of course, word went out quickly, and it blew up. Everyone wanted it. So Brunswick, again, was chartered in 1761 and has never been populated very much at all. They would come up into Vermont, but then very slowly come right back out. So Anglo and Abenaki tribes began this huge conflicted relationship over the springs. And it was killing them because people were coming and taking the waters just freely, and you can't go against the great spirits, and they provide, and then everyone is taking advantage of it. But again, it started taking off with American entrepreneurs, the notion of free sharing, and free enterprise, and all, what I'm saying. So a lot of businessmen came in and tried to work with the Native Americans that were there, but they held very firm to their decision that they will not sell the water. No one will. And because of all that and the conflict and the drama, it brings out the worst in people. Trying to negotiate. And of course, the Native Americans hold firm, and it began to be very hostile. And in the end, 2 of the Indians would be killed as a result. Like, I don't know what to say to that. Like, it's just so sad, and just our consumption economy, and I don't know. I don't know what I'm thinking about that, but there's something, yeah. One of the mothers of one of the men that passed, she happened to be a shaman and a sorceress. And that depends on who you hear the story from, that either she was one or the other or both, and that she was the one who had cursed this land. And she said, quote, "Any use of the waters of the Great Spirit for profit will never prosper." So that curse is now attached to the springs. And some are non-believers, but a lot of them are, that the Great Spirit did put a curse on that area. And because of that curse, that is exactly what happened. That any use of the waters will never prosper. So, as a lot of the white settlers started to come in, really like replacing these Native Americans, the Native Americans were literally vanishing, being killed, being pushed out, and the springs became this huge part of business and more white settlers and more of the native tribes being pushed out. So in 1790, a boarding house was built to offer accommodation, and it was actually, they did not charge for it, and it was to be able to access the waters. And that just continued to grow. The number grew to 12 boarding houses on both sides of the river by 1820. In 1845, people from, Maine and all over were doing this crazy journey to just go sample the healing waters. And these waters and the springs were actually advertised. This is very odd to me, as people being able to come in with murders of, from the prisons and stuff, but to heal them of like their limbs, vitality, kidney problems, consumption, all that, all the diseases that were going around. I don't know why I left that in there, because it's an odd point, I believe. So, and of course, with all those people, the railroad followed. And it was changing Vermont like crazy. Their economics, their landscape. And it made going to the springs effortless for people. It was not as hard as a trip for these people to get there. And the train would pull in and just floods of people would come out. And this was actually in North Stratford, New Hampshire, where they would let everyone out. And then they would board a carriage that would bring them across the river into Brunswick. So a man named Charles Bailey, he would actually erect the very first hotel near the springs in 1860. But shortly after that, he sold it to a local dentist. His name was D.C. Rowell. And he named this new adventure that he was on the Brunswick Springs House. He was the first person in the history of the springs to actually sell bottled water. He actually opened a plant to, bottle the water and make a ton of it. But, there's that curse there. And that curse sent a warning shot. Because in 1894, the Brunswick Spring House burned to the ground. Get it, curse. So the dentist rebuilt again in a like on the bluff between the lake and the river, and he called it the Pinecrest Lodge. And then history kind of lost track of this dentist, and he died in 1910. And later, the lodge collapsed into the river after the foundation gave way because of a lot of the erosion. He put it up on this bluff, and water patterns were moving in different places, and the springs were again back on the market. So a man named John Hutchins saw the springs as his economic victory, and he was very financially well off, and he was a huge businessman of the 20th century. He was very vain, and he had a huge portfolio of many different businesses that he was working on, that he made all his money on. He was actually a druggist which I believe is the name for a pharmacist at that time. But hey, he did real estate. He was a mortician, and he was buying up land in the woodland areas to become a lumber baron. But it was like never enough for him. He wanted to make as much money as he could, and he had this thought that Brunswick Springs would be a just jackpot investment, and to make him, this celebrity around it. And, at that time, grand resorts were becoming a huge thing. They were popping up everywhere. Like, even look at the Crescent Hotel. Now, I can't remember when it was built, but it had the same healing waters, and so people came for them. And so these waters were just a huge profit area. And so, with his expertise in business and pharmaceuticals and real estate, he wanted to really develop Vermont. Um, and, the curse keeps coming into play, and he keeps hearing about it, but he's like, no, I'm going to buy this. And his ambitions were just massive. And so he was like, I don't care. I'm doing this. And he started to sell, quote, nature's magic elixir. And that really set him apart for the people that he was competing with. Also, because Robert Ripley stepped in and was bringing this nationwide awareness of the springs. And this guy really had a knack for business. He's a horrible person, but he had a real knack for it. And he just knew what Brunswick Springs could be. So if you're going from the springs, the view really descends down towards the Connecticut River, and there's just rugged mountains everywhere. And then up a hill is a tiny lake that's up against a granite hill. And to him, it was just this dream come true. He eventually bought the place and chose a new spot to build the new resort. And he did this with the waters as part of the whole package of the resort and the healing waters. But 1921, the hotel burned down before it even had its grand opening. But he's not superstitious, and he's not going to give up because of how much he believes this area has so much potential and profits just waiting. So he rebuilt again, and this time it was even more opulent than the last one. He just went all out. He hired a contractor named Harry Savage, and he pushed his crew so hard through like the winter months, which winter in Vermont is probably awful, to rebuild his hotel. And it happened. It was completed and ready to open the doors by the springtime, which is insane. It's insane. So his new hotel was a rarity in Vermont, probably in a lot of places too, because it was just remarkable. It was a 4.5-story structure with 60 rooms. It had plate glass windows with spring water piped into the building, and just reservations like crazy because everyone wants to be there for opening day. But in 1930, just a month before the hotel opened, the night watchman spotted smoke billowing from the storage room, but it was too late. And with that fire, the phone lines got heated and actually snapped. So there was no communication from the building to anywhere else while it's just burning down. So even with these two warnings, still no acknowledgement of the curse, nothing. And, again, he hired the same contractor, and the crews worked through the winter and built another one. In 1931, the hotel was ready for business and it was advertised as, quote, a modern city hotel nestled between the White and Green Mountains. There was this, colorful brochure that was just distributed everywhere, and it was advertising the medicine waters of the Great Spirit. Quote, the medicine waters of the Great Spirit. And their ties to Native Americans and the mystery, and just a very dramatic design scheme of the magic fountains that he'd built and the healing waters. And he actually would charge for these magic fountains and the waters, of course. So it was even larger than the last one. It had 100 rooms, and the Brunswick's water pumped into every one of them. Insane. They had bought limousines, and they also purchased different transports to the guest from the railroad depot. And then in April of 1931, his third and last hotel was struck down by an inferno, just massive fire. And then they, finally they're like, maybe he's a believer. Maybe he's figured out, because he never tried to rebuild again. In all the years that followed, no one tried. And like the Great Spirit drove away all these vultures, with their temptations and their lust for money and glory. And that's when Brunswick got very small. So the guy writing this article questions what really happened, because hotel records have fires of hotels all the time. But this was such an odd chain of events and freak accidents. And they actually linked these blazes to the combustion of paint fumes in a storage room. And that was just one of them. The other two they have no idea what happened to him. There's just this belief that the higher powers were so done with him and everyone else that tried to come in, especially John Hutchins. So after the last hotel had burned down, his health declined rapidly, and he passed away in 1938 at the age of 74. And going back, a lot of people who live in this area have always had this very strange feeling of this place. Some more stories about it. Quote, as two men hanged themselves in the area and one woman drove her car into the lake and drowned. This is again from Miss Kettle, who we spoke about earlier. She says her brother found a man's body in a tree when he was out hunting in the area. And as a small child, he actually snuck down there to see it. And he says it made him sick, and that this man had hung himself overlooking the lake. So the surrounding lands of this area have been given back to the Abenakis. And they actually formed a nonprofit organization to purchase it with the help of the Vermont Land Trust. So now they legally are able to prevent any sort of development near the springs. And the springs are really the only thing that Brunswick has been recognized for. And it's like almost unnoticeable on maps, which is very, very weird. And a lot of the old maps, the area of Brunswick is and with old maps, that area is labeled Brunswick Springs instead of Brunswick. And even today, Google Maps will take you to the village center at Brunswick Springs. regardless of road signs that call it Brunswick. I want to read a story from a blog, which I believe was I'm trying to make sure I cite my sources better. Um, I believe it was The Mysterious Universe by Brett Swanser. Sure. Let me get back down to it. So, this is what Brett is talking about. Um, we saw something on the trail ahead of us. Curiously, we trudged forward to get a better look at the cryptic artifact in the snow, which turned out to be a decoratively stitched, handmade bag filled with rose petals. It was an offering of some sort, and that was a good sign. The Abenaki still revere the area as a sacred one and often come here and leave gifts to honor the springs and the spirits that twist and turn through the trees. So I hoped that meant we were at least on the right path in a literal sense of that metaphor. My hunch seemed to be correct when our path brought us skirting along Silver Lake, and then to our right I saw an unmissable, worn concrete staircase leading down to the lakeshore. It was a fragment from the old hotel, and we knew we were close. We walked a bit further, both of our spirits elevated at the discovery of the staircase. Then we found more ancient ruins of the former business operations here. Another staircase plugged down a steeper pitch that the years have chipped away at. The ice-chunked waters of the Connecticut moving steadily southbound through the trees. The smell of sulfur immediately overtook the formerly thin and sweet country air, and we had made it. I stood at the crest of the drop for a few minutes observing my surroundings, before joking that the real adventure would be descending the stairs. Though it was in the 60s, it still was February, which meant the steps were slick with treacherous ice that could easily send you to the hospital after sending you down into the river. The hillside beside the stairs didn't seem like a much better way to travel. Death gripping onto lead pipe hand railings, we scrambled down to a cement landing at the bottom. There were rusted pipes running horizontally underneath the walkway channeled water from a green-dyed pool sunken into the hillside, filled with white stringy forms that looked like hair that swayed in the currents. A huge block the size of a dishwasher from some part of the rubble detached itself and fell down the embankment, coming to rest when its weight buried a corner into the earth. Other visitors left several offerings and totems here, from candles, rose petals, and dream catchers, and miscellaneous trinkets such as beads, glass bottles, seashells, and colorful ribbon ornaments around tree branches. The wonderful smell of dead leaves followed me down what was left of an old logging road into a forest that was so quiet and still it was starting to creep under my skin. Then I saw the unmistakable ruins of an early 20th century mineral springs hotel. Not only a few foundations and stairs leading to nowhere. I had missed the cellar hole of Hutchins Hotel on my first sojourn and wanted to scout these out. I wandered around before the night hummed in, hoping I'd find some old glass bottles or buttons or maybe even a pocket watch, something long dropped by a guest now long turned into dust. Then I scrambled back down the banks to the springs and their sulfuric perfume. But did I sample the waters? No, just to be safe. While it's understandable to get inspired by the parables, the code of conduct here is definitely caveat emptor. The silence was deep, and unseen specters probably sulked amongst the trees. In all the stories I hearkened about, this place being a stomping ground for continuing life of the supernatural kind and other possible unsettling encounters came to life. To this day, the area is still said to be pervaded by insidious forces, with many reports of feeling an undefinable sense of dread or being watched, and electrical equipment or compasses are said to go haywire on occasion. Even more sinister are the stories of people who have come here to kill themselves by hanging from the trees, as well as the case of a woman who died here after driving her car into the lake. The area's springs are also still said to retain their powers, with some locals swearing by this, telling of having been healed of injury, and other elderly residents crediting the water for longevity. All I can reckon is that the magical springs at Brunswick continue to float freely, at and just as the sorceress predicted, no one had any luck in profiting them. And this is another article from the three that I had mentioned. And I'm going to read it word for word also because they just describe it so much better than me. But they are cited in my notes. They are cited in the show notes also if you want to look into it also. It says Brunswick Springs is truly a spot of mystery and death, an eerie location that is severely haunted and is teeming with legends and curses. Located on the Silver Lake along the Connecticut River, there are many ruins that can be found throughout the dense forest. Upon your first visit, one may wonder why all these ruins are here. Let's just say it's a long story. The legend of the springs began well before any settlers knew of the place. It is said that the Native Americans, mostly Abenaki, used the location for years as sacred lands. The namesake of the location is 6 different springs that flow from a forest directly into the Connecticut River, and it's said that these springs have magical healing powers. Each spring is composed of a different chemical such as arsenic, iron, calcium, magnesium, bromide, and sulfur. Supposedly, the Native Americans knew the perfect combination of these 6 chemicals, and they were successful in curing some horrible wounds, even ones that were life-threatening. The first reported use of the springs was in 1748 when the Native Americans brought an injured British soldier to the waters after his arm needed amputation. It's said that they were able to bring back feeling in the man's arm and he could use the appendage once again. Later, after the French and Indian War, the same soldier came back to bottle and sell the magical waters. The Abenaki were not happy with his attempt to profit off the Great Spirit. The area underwent many disputes between the Abenaki and greedy businessmen wanting to profit from the springs, eventually leading to the death of 2 Native Americans. The mother of one of the dead, a local sorceress, was grief-stricken and set the now famous curse over the lands. Any use of the waters for the Great Spirit for profit will never prosper. People began to flock to the springs from far-off places, all in the hopes of curing their injuries or diseases. In 1860, Charles Bailey built the first hotel on the site, known as Brunswick Springs House. Mysteriously, the building burnt down in 1894. Later, D.C. Rowell, a dentist, built the Pinecrest Lodge atop the banks of the Connecticut River, but again it didn't succeed as it collapsed into the river. John Hutchins, a rich man from North Stratford, decided he wasn't rich enough and figured he could use the springs as a site for a grand resort. His first hotel burned down in 1929, immediately before its grand opening. He had a hotel built in 1930 with the help of Mr. Savage, and just before it set to open on May 15th, the hotel burned down. Hutchins was determined to build a grand resort and had another one built and completed the next year. With 100 rooms, the hotel was better than all of its predecessors. No matter how impressive of a hotel he built, it wasn't saved from the curse, and his third hotel burnt down with no discernible cause. The land was eventually given back to the Abenaki, but that doesn't mean the curse is gone. Silver Lake is said to be bottomless, and it has been the site of many mysterious deaths in recent years. For many people hanging themselves along the coast of the pond, to a woman driving her car in the water, and even a baby being found strangled by the shore, it's clear that these lands are still cursed. Upon our visit, there was certainly an eerie feeling lingering over the place. Throughout the forest can be found many ruins from the 5 former hotels. The ruins include old foundations, rusted metal, and many staircases leading to nothing. It may be cursed, but Silver Lake is quite beautiful. Even though it's less than a mile from the road, the forest is quiet. Much like East Mountain, the silence is deafening. Beside the shore of the lake, we found a sweat lodge, otherwise known as a Native American sauna. While many people have corrupted the land over the years, the Abenaki still see the lands as sacred, and if you happen to see other people there, please be respectful. Down the embankment can be found a long, treacherous staircase which leads to the now crumbling springs. One of the hotels built a deck above the springs, which apparently separated the 6 chemicals. The waters flow right from the ground with no obvious source. Over the years, the iron and calcium pipes have broken, but they still flow. Been warned because the area is surrounded by such a strong stench of sulfur. The springs flow directly into the Connecticut River. The ground around the springs is tinted orange, likely due to the chemicals, and the strands of calcium can be found throughout the water. In the trees can be found many offerings and pleads for healing. These waters are clearly still used for healing, and according to the notes, many people still make long treks to the land in hopes of better lives and healed families. Atop one of the banks can be had a great view of the Connecticut River and some peaks, such as Hutchins Mountain and Savage Mountain. Those names sound familiar, don't they? This area is very eroded, likely being the site of the former resort that collapsed into the river. It makes you wonder if the whole area will eventually meet the same fate. While the area may seem lame or boring to the average person, it's rich with history and legends. If you believe in ghosts, this is the area for you. There's a haunting aura that hovers over the place, one that may draw you in or scare you away. That's for you to find out. If one does not make the bold decision to visit, please, over everything else, be respectful to those who still wander there and those who have passed on. So this place is definitely different. Like, it's not huge ghost stories, but I wanted to definitely do something different. There's this curse, and this, I believe, evidence of this curse actually happening, and so many deaths there. It really reminded me of I don't think they call it this, but the suicide forest in Japan. If you've never heard that one, it's very sad, but it's very good. And I've watched a documentary about it where these guys actually go inside the forest, and they like run into people just wandering around in there. And they're with a woman who becomes so discombobulated, and it's crazy. So I wonder if Brunswick Springs has a lot of that incorporated into it, the healing water, the curse, the spirits that are all over. Does it drive people into their demise? Did it draw that woman into the lake? Or like the poor baby, is it a place where serial killers go, or any sort of killer? Is it where bodies are dumped? Like, it's just I thought this was a very interesting subject. I thought it was still a resort town when I first started doing it, and then realizing that it's completely gone. There are no buildings there, and these just very creepy remnants and staircases, and I just really liked this subject. It was definitely a cool one for me, and I hope you guys like it too. Just a little different this time. Thank you all so much for listening today, episode 25. I really appreciate it. Next week, we are going to go to Delaware and visit Fort Delaware. Again, I learned a lot. I had no clue anything about Delaware, so I'm really excited about that one. I got a ton of information, and videos, and it's cool. There's a lot that goes into it. So yeah, I'm excited. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I will see you next week. Thank you guys for all of your support and listens and reviews, and I just thank you guys so much. I'll quit saying thank you a million times like I usually do at the end, and I will just let you go. So, thank you guys. Thank you so much. I will talk to you later.